Direct Healing by Paul Ellsworth. 12th and final chapter, The Life of Mastery. Evolution and regeneration are complementary processes. By the first, creative spirit worked out through the ages the various types of animals which we see about us. Evolution dealt with the type. Regeneration, on the contrary, has to do with the individual. As this chapter is to deal with the fruits of regeneration in that life of mastery and perfection to which it at length leads, it may be well briefly to sum up the more obvious characteristics of the process. First, regeneration is a natural process through which the entire race as individuals is slowly passing. By it, bodies are being refined and minds quickened. That the body is not a completed structure at present, many scientists agree. And for proof that the human mind is evolving from a lower to a higher condition, we have only to look back at the crudities of the Middle Ages. Mankind in the mass is far from being perfect now, but the average of kindliness and wisdom is wonderfully higher than it was. And because this process of regeneration takes in the whole man in his body, his hopes, and his activities, there is no killing out by it of anything which makes life worth living. Second, this process of regeneration, through which all men are passing slowly, may be accelerated whenever and wherever desire exists. Third, since regeneration is a process established by the Father for the perfection of His children, it is founded on law, not chance. The fulfillment of this law does not require the suppression of any real desire. Such desire is always creative. Sensualism must be left behind, but this is necessary also for a life of success on the physical or intellectual planes. The prize fighter and the mathematician alike must keep their bodies under if they would excel. And regeneration makes the reason for this plain by showing that sensualism is simply the blind endeavor of the ego to find in and without that satisfaction which can be found only within. Fourth, righteousness, the condition of being always in right relations with all things, is a characteristic of the regenerate man. It is an ideal and a practical condition and brings with it the mastery of the world of subjective force. Fifth, this normal and orderly process of regeneration is certain to all men eventually, for where the individual begins to grow in the wrong direction and to fasten himself to carnality through exclusive attention to the things of the flesh, suffering and tribulation seek him out in due season, and he is given some elementary lessons in the relative importance of the physical and the spiritual. There exists in every human being a latent consciousness that he or she is of the royal household and is entitled to mastery and dominion. When an exclusive seeking of the objective pleasures of life has brought its inevitable results, discontent and remorse begin to whisper of a possible better way. Sixth and last, it is up to you. You may be led, but if you will not, you must be driven. Advance you must, and eventually you will have to accept the kingship of wisdom and power and love, which were yours before the planets were created. As I have before suggested, however, spiritual growth is growth, and it is useless to try to push on the lines. There is a time for being born into the way of regeneration and a time for coming of age in this new life. Neither the one nor the other can be hurried, but you who read these words are already treading the path of discipleship. God has called you, and you are journeying toward Him. All that is needed is for you to hold yourself open to the light as it comes more and more fully to you, and to ignore the seeming chaos which the new principles of thinking and living are making with the things of your former life. The earliest lessons which New Thought advances are those having to do with the control by the individual of his own inner forces. Presently, he goes a step beyond this kindergarten lesson and begins to experiment with the possibility of controlling what might be called the subjective mind of nature. He finds that he can, by the use of affirmations or by the formation of a definite and dynamically projected spiritual pattern, produce results in the world beyond himself. Now, it might seem logical to believe that in the gradual perfection of this power of control of subjective life, in and beyond the limits of his own personality, lay the possibilities of all future growth. That was the ideal of many of the Eastern wisdom religions, but it is not the ultimate aim of regeneration. Far beyond it lies something definitely greater and more desirable. The perfected life, the life of mastery, in which, because his central aims are founded on the Father, the Christ man finds everything working with him without his conscious use of affirmations or treatments of any kind. This is the life of accomplishment, of real and perfected success, and it is the fruition of righteousness and regeneration. There are many conceptions of God and his universe, but one which may help in the realization of this ideal of the perfect life is somewhat as follows. There exists a world of subconscious and automatic forces, bounded on one side by infinite and impersonal love and wisdom, and on the other side by the personalities of men. God directs these automatic forces for his great ends from his side, and we, his children, blindly utilize them from the other. Subjective force in itself is essentially impersonal and unloving. It neither loves nor hates, and will work for the murderer if he complies with its laws just as swiftly as it will for the saint. Tornadoes, the ravages of disease, wars, and all the scourges which lash carnal man are the results of the outworking of false beliefs, sunk into this mind of automatic forces. But in spite of all this misuse of force by men, the world is gradually growing better. Individual minds, working in diverse ways and from the selfish standpoint, would wreck the universe if they were left to themselves. But always there is the Father, working gently and unrestingly on the other side of the world machine and guiding it toward his perfect ends. Now, this is far from being a perfect concept of the universe, but it will serve to bring out the nature of man's first lessons in the existence of the world of subjective force. Like the child who is to be trained to the arena, he is given the two-edged sword and allowed to discover for himself some of its characteristics. And this training goes on by easy stages until the time comes when he cries out for a wisdom and a love greater than his own to direct him in the use of powers which have begun to terrify him. He realizes that in his limited personality he is but a pygmy. Unconsciously, he is standing on the royal threshold, and the next step will carry him into the Father's very presence. It is this next step which sometimes halts the seeker after righteousness until his patience and faith are sorely tried. The old has been torn away by the wind of the Spirit. He cannot go back, and he seems unable to go forward. Perhaps his work has been taken from him, and nothing seems to come to take its place. Even his use of affirmations and suggestions seems not as effective as formerly was, and the explanation is so simple that for a long time he overlooks it. He has passed through the primary grades. The Father is calling him to come up higher, to enter his life work, and to drop the limitations imposed by the supposed necessity for his manipulating by indirect or tardily effective means the subjective power. The perfect life is the life of perfect and constant receptivity. Training is necessary to prepare the child of the Spirit to enter it, for he must learn the nature of true desire and must learn the secret of cooperation between God and man, which sets him in his divinely appointed place. And it is this relation between his part and his Father's part which is usually the obstacle to his taking the final step. Receptivity, self-realization, so perfected that the man sees himself as the lens of the Spirit, the hand of God. Heretofore he has cried out to have his own way. Now he sees that his way and God's way are identical in their ends, and only differ in the means of attaining these ends. The difference is like that existing between a man who lays out his path through a forest from the valley and one who seeks out the most direct way from the mountain top. Both may be trying to reach the same point, but the one goes a step at a time, encountering obstacles he could not foresee, and often finds himself forced to retrace his steps or to travel in circles of confusion. The other has seen all the obstacles from his vantage ground, so is able to avoid them. So it is that the perfection of living comes only when the individual has so learned his lesson that he is willing and glad to have the Father choose the means for every accomplishment, serenely confident that God desires for him all that he desires for himself. God never destroys any real creative desire. Every worthwhile accomplishment in the universe is God's work, and he will quicken and perfect the worker in brass and steel just as surely, if the conditions are complied with, as he will the mission worker. And the conditions are all summed up in the Golden Rule. Throughout the preceding chapters of this book, I have suggested some of the difficulties which lie in the way of demonstration and the means for overcoming them. These have all been obstacles to the final entering into the perfected life, for new thought is but the path of the Spirit leading toward fruition, and all who tread this path are returning toward the Father's house. One of the greatest of these obstacles is seen to be a misunderstanding as to the nature of financial reward and of the spiritual principles relating to it. In conscious preparation for the life hid with God, the life where imperfection has given place in every detail to the full perfection which is ordained for every child of spirit, it will be well to examine your life and your consciousness again along these lines. The perfect life is built on the foundation of accomplishment. It has nothing to do with vague and idle dreaming. And the only kind of work which can serve as the foundation for this perfected life is that which the Father organized you for, your life work. Remember that you have done with the ordinary conceptions of time, and that you are now living in eternity. And so if you have made a wrong start, if you have chosen a job instead of a line of creative activity in which your whole future finds expression, you cannot too soon begin to correct your mistake. It is not a question of financial reward primarily. Even in the world, you will be told that the best work is that done for its own sake. And farther, you will discover that the best paid workers are those who act from this standpoint. There is not a line of occupation in the universe which cannot be made to pay if the man back of it is working from the Christ consciousness. Another thing in connection with your work, you are not to choose something with the idea of laying up a competency so that you may retire from work. The work is the thing. The money you get out of it is simply the physical supply for doing more work. Action, creation, accomplishment, this is the greatest thing in the universe. The man who is working solely for wages has not begun to live. He has not found himself. And the human being who desires to retire simply because he has a big enough bank account so that he no longer needs to create is already dead. He is finished as far as the present stage in living and learning goes, and the only thing left to do is to bury him. Another ideal which has come up repeatedly throughout these pages is that of love. No more need to be said except to make the very obvious suggestion that the only door into the kingdom is love. Not the sentimental, hysterical, or rhapsodical kind, but serene and fearless love, which gives freely of all that is demanded of it. Love which resists not evil, but which replaces evil with good by comprehending the reality of good and the nullity of evil. Such love is just as practical as are ball bearings or lubricated axles. All of the ideas and ideals of New Thought lead toward the full regeneration, but there comes a time when every man must step off for himself without other guidance than the light of the world within himself. If he has learned the lessons of faith and love and wisdom, which the manipulation of subjective force, united with objective work and constant openness to the Father's guidance alone, can teach him, he will have little difficulty in doing this. The principal difficulty will be in adjusting himself to that perfect balance of receptivity and action which may help in this final demonstration. Perhaps I can offer a few suggestions which will help in this final demonstration. First, the new life can never be made a compromise. It must be a case of this one thing I do. When there is any doubt as to the effect of any activity in the life, when you think something you are doing may be hindering your spiritual growth, stop doing it for a while. Never mind if it does seem necessary. If it is truly so, God will see that it is done, either by freeing your conscience of all doubt on the matter or by appointing someone else to do it. Be regular in the times and seasons of prayer. Coming into full and conscious unity with God has become the first and most important thing in your life, and you must go at it with system and serene determination. Find time or make time. Put in all the time in prayer and contemplation of the nature of your relation to the Father that you can without becoming fatigued. A 5-minute petition for guidance at the end of a strenuous day is perhaps better than nothing, but it will not serve here. Second, definitely and formally place God in the first place in your life. If you will examine your half-formed and wholly unrecognized thoughts on the subjects of health, success, prosperity, etc., you may be surprised to find that some part of you is still clinging to the belief that exterior things are causes, that the laws of health really concern externals, and that prudence, parsimony, and the natural faculty for driving hard bargains lie back of success. Take time to put your faith in God where it belongs. Say, "Dear Father, I recognize Thee and Thee only as the cause of all that comes to me. I accept Thee as my health and my supply, and from this time forward I shall never again consider symptoms or conditions, but shall be sure only that I am living as Thou hast ordained that I should live." Third, as a farther step in this direction, and as a special lesson in the regeneration of the consciousness from all slavery to things, during your time of communion, every evening, mentally relinquish all your so-called possessions. Turn them back to the infinite source and contemplate yourself as absolutely free and isolated from every physical crutch and encumbrance, for things are apt to be just about as much one as the other. Make this a very real relinquishment, for it is necessary for you to get away from the old idea of exclusive ownership. All belongs to you that you need and desire, but sometimes one thing is substituted for another, when the wisdom of the Father leads him to make the change. You must hold your tools lightly, ready to exchange them when the Spirit leads you to do so. It is not the things you can put a fence around or your brand on which are truly yours, but those which you can use to the best advantage in accomplishing the work God leads you through your desires to do. And the strange and unexpected part of all this relinquishment will be that Material things will come to you in unexpected ways as you loosen the grip of your fear and doubt upon those which you now have. Nothing will be taken from you unless the time of its usefulness to you has passed. But other things will come, for by opening yourself to the Father's guidance in this way, you have also opened the door of your being to the acceptance of the other desirable things He has for you. When that which is perfect is come, that which is in part shall be done away with. Dear friend, you whom I probably shall never meet face to face, in all that I have written on this subject of direct healing and regeneration, I am that which is in part. I can perhaps tell you of difficulties which other travelers on this way of life have met, and of the weapons of the Spirit which they have forged to overcome them. But in relation to you or to any other of God's children, I can never be more than a voice crying, "Prepare ye the way." The key to that preparation and fulfillment lies within you. You were created for success, for the grandest and greatest success you can conceive. And as you go forward along the way of demonstration, your conception of what the Father has ordained for you will grow until you will realize that in truth, nothing is too good to be true. End of chapter 12 of Direct Healing by Paul Ellsworth. Narrated by Rex King.